Hello and welcome to Amati Insights call. As you know, for those of you who dial into this regularly, we do this every 2 weeks and we pick a subject that we think is important for our investors to understand, where we have a considered view that really impacts our portfolio and investors' thinking. So the subject this time is industrial technology as it relates to manufacturing capex. Very topical given what's happening. But before we get to that, just a reminder that nothing we say here is a recommendation to buy or sell any security or fund, and we encourage investors to do their own research and seek professional advice if necessary. So with that, just to remind us, I mean, probably we don't need reminding how important manufacturing capex is, given that American administration reminds us about that from the screen every day. But even before the election of President Trump and the current administration coming into force, there was this talk about, and somebody used this expression, X-shoring, near-shoring, reshoring, friend-shoring, decoupling Western economies from their dependency on the Chinese manufacturing supply chains, bringing more jobs onshore, but also creating more supply chain resiliency and security, especially for some categories like pharmaceutical goods, like defense-related technology, where it was mission critical, important for national security over and above the economic effect. So in some ways, it's this kind of global realignment has been in focus for a while, but really came into focus with the tariffs and this very aggressive pro-reshoring agenda of the Trump administration. So that's the kind of the big backdrop to that. And we have seen a little bit of we have a glimpse of economic response to that. It's not conclusive, and it's pretty hard to parse out what's real or what's pre-buy ahead of incoming tariffs. But we've seen, for example, a real acceleration in the robotics exports out of Japan into America. And some of that may be tariff pre-buy, some of that may be preparing for building factories onshore. We've seen a lot of announcements of big manufacturing plants by pharma companies, electronics companies, semiconductor companies across the board. Some of that may be real, some of that may be PR, but that's obviously contributed to that. We've seen growth in manufacturing construction spending. Before you populate the factory with machines, you have to build a building, and that's been going up, beyond kind of data centers and semiconductor plants. So there, and of course, small business confidence on the election of Trump has picked up a lot. But then since we've seen a lot of uncertainty in terms of unpredictability of the current policy and a lot of decisions currently on hold, maybe transitorily. So that's the sort of the backdrop where we're considering what's going to happen with manufacturing capex. Now, nobody needs to be reminded that factory automation is a thing. Everybody knows why it's important. It brings pretty high ROI. It does take jobs out of the factory. That's maybe counter to some of the policy objectives, but it also removes variability of cost. So that's well known. But beyond that, it'll be interesting to explore what are the bigger vision, and who better to do than my colleague Graeme, who is just back from, I want to say, the world's biggest, or certainly one of the world's biggest
Definitely Europe's
industrial.
biggest. Yeah.
Let's make it one of the world's biggest technology, industrial technology exhibition trade show, which is the Hanover Messe. So, what is the big vision emerging from that, Graeme?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's every year it's fascinating to go, and the reason is because we go to a lot of trade shows, and often they're quite specific. So it might be, factory automation, or it might be, Internet of Things or whatever, but quite specific areas. But the great thing about Hanover Messe is everything is there, from screws and nuts and bolts all the way through to AI software and, augmented reality and advanced robotics. Everything is there. And I spent a couple of days there and just talking to a lot of people and walking around and seeing how things are changing in different areas. And what really struck me was, we know that factories have been going towards more and more automation, as you say, and there's this kind of destination of the dark factory. So no people in it, no heating, no lighting, because you don't need them because it's all robotic. And I think that's kind of a well understood concept. But what became evident, particularly this year, talking to software companies and robotics companies, was that that's only part of the story, and that really where they're developing to is a kind of, almost think of the factory as like a living organism. So the brain being obviously AI that controls everything through complex software that links to the design of whatever the product is that's being built in the factory. And that software doesn't stop with the design. It also includes the the way the factory is laid out, the kind of constantly monitoring efficiency, and then monitoring the product when it goes out into the world. So that kind of feedback loop of the product life cycle. And in that context, the factories are increasingly becoming software defined, software orientated, with huge numbers of sensors. So they're in a way self-monitoring and even to some extent becoming self-healing. So they can use robotics to go and assess and predict maintenance before it happens, before it's needed. And a lot of that again can be done without human intervention or remotely. So we're moving towards this very unusual but quite advanced concept of almost a living factory that's self-improving, and not just its own structure, but also the products it's producing.
I mean, that's pretty sort of long term and I wouldn't say abstract, but kind of quite a theoretical vision at this point. But kind of we have to go through you know a couple of steps towards that. One of that is very easy for us to understand, which is the kind of the near term uncertainty. I mean, I say easy. It's what defines the current market behavior. A lot of decisions are on hold. Even if fundamentally that factory needs to be built, you know, a company that is thinking about that might still be thinking, well, does it go to Canada? Does it go to Mexico? Does it go to Michigan? Let's wait another 3 months when picture is clear. So we're in this very transitory but very profound pause in investment decision making. We've got a 3 to 5 year time investment horizon. We can live with that as long as we portfolio manage around that. That's not a problem. But where I guess our process comes into its own is translating that very long-term vision into specific technologies and products, which as we sometimes call pass our innovation test. They are working today. We can see them in action. They are important and potentially very profitable steps on the way to that vision. So kind of thinking back to all the things you've seen on the trade show, what are those things? Let's walk through them and discuss them in some more detail.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples, and just a few that spring to mind. We've obviously talked quite a lot before on these kind of forums and in reports we've put out about electrification and electrification by stealth and how it's happening across lots of different fronts. Um, Historically, a lot of pneumatics was used in factories, but we're seeing now more and more that being replaced by actuators, and again, historically heavy, very strong. They're even used in agricultural applications, increasingly across factories. So they're lower maintenance, much cleaner, etc.
So we're talking moving big things, moving heavy weights, which used to be done hydraulically or pneumatically. Now there's an electric motor and mechanics around it that does this, like this
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. And often cheaper and requiring a lot less maintenance. Um, Other areas, there were lots of robots around the factory, that around the exhibition this year. People have seen the robot dog, thousands of them already out in the wild, as it were, in factories, doing inspections of things like heat and vibration, detecting gas leaks, just constantly monitoring, different environments, different industrial environments. And so again, really interesting and lots going on there. Um, and that helps. That's like a remote sensor. Again, this kind of living factory. It's almost like the immune system of the factory going out and checking how where things are going wrong. Um, and then a factory needs to know where everything is. So this idea of kind of real time location monitoring. There are a number of different technologies that do this. We're obviously big investors in RFID. That's one of the systems that are used for tracking things around factories, but there are a number of others. Um, there are Here you can see that increasingly the software is becoming much better at kind of mapping out where things are, which can then be fed into the AI model to optimize the structure of the factory layout and make sure that things are being used in the right order and the right, in kind of to the maximum optimization, if you like. And what's
And
really great, sorry.
no, I was just going to say so that white, if you like, round object, almost like a puck. It looks like a giant fire alarm sitting at the top of that picture. That's RFID reader, that overhead reader that reads everything that's tagged, which probably means everything in the room and knows exactly where everything is all the time at high speed. That's one of the Zebra products, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, the zebra picture you can see there. That was yes. I mean, RFID is used in lots of different ways. Handheld devices in retail applications, but in factories, increasingly these kind of, as you say, that white puck-looking item, they're scattered around factories and they can monitor in real time lots and lots of different things that they're tracking, whatever they are, whether they're tools or products or whatever. And really fascinating, again, going back to that idea of the self-improving factory. We're seeing assembly lines now that are becoming robotized, so able to kind of realign, self-align, as it were, into the most optimum structure. You can see a sort of little example here of how you can just imagine this as a big production line, and because it's modular, it can be adjusted in real time to improve the kind of efficiency.
I mean, this is quite mind-blowing in a way because it's basically robotic squared, isn't it? Not only these things are robotically doing what they need to do at every stage of the process, but if you want to switch around and polish thing before you glue it together or glue it together before you polish it, the bits of the machinery that do those stages just sort of swap around and the life goes on. That's just
Yeah,
beginning, isn't it? We're just at the start of that
that's the
realignment
thing.
trend.
Yeah, exactly. And it is very early. We can see the kind of roadmap, but it's still, a lot of this is just happening. And maybe here, this one, you can see very complex shapes being assessed by a sensor on a robot arm. This is very useful for quality control and even just scanning an item to put it into the software in order to be able to replicate it or whatever. So there's just lots of opportunities for factories to be able to kind of do a lot of these things themselves without human intervention and then optimize them.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of what it means for our investing, of course, for those of our listeners who know how we invest, we have this pioneer, enabler, and adopter approach. So, we're just as interested in very prosaic lateral beneficiaries of these changes um, as we are in the companies at the leading edge that invent the sort of the most novel technology involved. You had a great example from a bearings company that you met that illustrates that, not in our portfolio, but we've got a couple of others along that line.
Yeah, it's amazing. You'd think kind of roller bearings, they don't develop that much, but incredibly, things like humanoid robots, they need very light, very strong, and very durable different bearing structures. And there's a company, Schaeffler, a German company, that is a real leader here in bearings and electromechanics. And they've just made enormous strides forward in making these bearings much lighter and much higher load bearing. So again, even things that are very prosaic but are needed in order to get to this ultimate destination we're talking about.
But in terms of things that we own, and of course, you met with some of those companies again at the trade show. Maybe just highlight a few portfolio holdings where we've learned something new, or we're kind of playing those themes, benefiting from those themes through our portfolio holdings today.
Yeah, I mean, obvious couple, Allegra Microsystems, which is a company that really plays into this whole area. So, motion sensors and power regulating chips, very necessary across lots of different robotic applications. And just the explosion in robotics we're seeing is really beneficial for that business. Design software I mentioned earlier, we own PTC and Autodesk. Both of those are very tapped into this idea of product lifecycle maintenance and expanding the scope of what they can do and how they interact with the factory environments. And Cognex, which is a machine vision company, a lot of here is a picture of me standing by a machine that you can see here that more and more machine vision and lidar and things are being used on autonomous robots, but also on quality control lines and things like that. So a number of our companies are really well positioned, we think, for this transition that's going on.
Yeah, well, we just need to live through the cyclical, or maybe even transitory hiatus that we're living through today. That's the challenge. It's probably one of the places in our portfolio where the long-term opportunity is in sharpest contrast with the near-term worry. But that's what long-term investing is all about. You have to look through this cyclical or transitory downturns towards the investment case that you have. Well, thanks very much for that. Fascinating as always, and thanks for our listeners dialing in. We will see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Right.